and I can advise that the meeting is now being recorded, and I'll take this adherent for the meeting of the Executive Committee held on 22nd of November 2023. I can see that we have present Councillor Allison, Anderson, Brown and Carmichael. I understand that Councillor Chalmers is having some difficulties getting on, so we may ask committee support to assist her with that. I can see that Councillor Clark is present. Similarly, I understand that Councillor Convery is having some difficulty joining, so we're sending some help his way as well. I can see that Councillor Cooper's present, as is Councillor Cowan, Councillor Devlin, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Ferguson-Miller, Councillor Hamilton. I have apologies from Councillor Horsham. I understand that Councillor Frame is substituting for him, and I see that she's in the meeting. We have present Councillors Logan, Loudon, Hugh MacDonald, McCallan, McClymont, McCreary, Leslie MacDonald, McGeever, McLachlan, Nelson. I have apologies from Councillor Razak, and Councillor Cowie is here substituting for Councillor Razak. I have apologies from Councillor Robb. We also have present Councillors Ross, Shearer and Walker. We also have Councillor Faulkner is observing the meeting only today. There are a number of officers present, and with that, Chair, I'll hand back to you for the business.
Okay, thank you very much, Pauline. Can I come to item 1, which is declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest to be made? And Councillor Cooper has indicated before I proceed, I should say I have received one item of urgent business which relates to the Kilbride Hospice, and I'm going to ask that it's circulated at this point, although I'll take it later in the meeting. This was discussed with the group leaders on Monday, and I think we want to make sure people have as much sight of that as possible before we come to it later today. But on that note, could I now come to Councillor Cooper?
Right, sorry. I was going to present this motion. However, being a trustee in the board, I had a discussion with Geraldine, and Jerry Convery's agreed to present the motion. There is really no conflict of interest for me, but I'm just being cautious. The motion doesn't request funds from the council. It merely requests that certain people are written to. But just to be on the cautious side, Jerry Convery is going to present that motion on my behalf. That will allow me to contribute to any discussion that takes place. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. And I think for clarity, the advice we've received is that the item of urgent business is seeking to draw our attention to an issue, and although you will see the wording of a motion in that urgent business, it's not proposed to deal with that motion today. It's proposed to deal with that at a future meeting of the council. The urgent business is simply to note that particular item at this point. So, Councillor Logan.
Urgent business. As a member of NHS Lanarkshire, where does that put me in this? Thank you.
Councillor Logan, I would advise you to declare an interest as you're a member of the board of NHS Lanarkshire.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Logan has indicated that she'll declare an interest at that point as well. If there are no other declarations of interest, pardon me, Councillor Cooper.
It's just to clarify.
I think we've lost Councillor Cooper. We'll just try to get her back.
Councillor Cooper, if you could press your microphone again, please. Thank you.
Got you now. No, we don't. hang on a second. We have you now, Councillor Cooper.
Just for clarity, that this item is not an item that I understand was discussed at any IJB. This is an item that was discussed purely at the NHS board level, it's just in case that clarifies matters for Councillor Logan. Geraldine could add to that if there's any requirement.
No, thanks for that. I think Councillor Logan's interest was that she was a member of the board of NHS Lanarkshire. Okay, if there are no other declarations of interest and nothing on that point, can I now come to item 2, which is minutes of the previous meeting? Can I ask that they are approved as a correct record? Are we agreed? We are agreed. Are there any issues arising from the minutes? I'm not seeing any hands, so can we move now to the next item, which is our revenue budget monitoring report? Could I come to Paul Manning to speak to the revenue budget monitoring report?
Okay, thanks, Chair. So this is the revenue budget monitoring report, and it takes us up to the beginning of October this year. There are 3 things in this report that I have reported to the committee on across the course of this year, and there is a bit of an update on each of those given. So the first one relates to Children and Families Services. You can see that at the foot of the first page of the paper. It talks about the fact that there is an overspend, that there is a funding solution for this year, but the resource continue to work towards identifying solutions for future years. On the second page of the paper, it talks about adults and older people and the outcome from the job evaluation exercise and the measures being looked at through the IJB to cope with that increase in cost. So at 4.7 there's an update given which says that officers within the IJB have been looking to identify funding solutions. Those solutions and an overall recovery plan were agreed by the IJB on the 18th of October, and budgets will be realigned in the coming months to reflect that agreement. The third item that you're given an update on is in relation to teacher numbers, the amount of money that has been held back in the Council's grant pending the 2023 census details being received by the Government. So again, that remains an issue, but it's one that will come to a head in the coming month. Also in the paper at section 5, there's a summary of the position on the housing revenue account, shows a break-even position. It does note that this includes a higher than budgeted transfer from reserves, and that's due to the increased level of costs being experienced. So in terms of the recommendations of the paper, it looks for noting of the positions on the general fund and on the housing revenue account, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Paul, can I ask if there are any questions on this item? I don't see any hands, so can we agree then to note the report? Agreed. I'll come now to the capital budget monitoring report. Paul.
Okay, thank you. So, capital report, at the foot of the first page, you can see that we are now dealing with a revised programme of £78.9 million. So that's a decrease of 1.455 from the previous report that you got. At the foot of that first page and at the top of the second page, it just gives a summary of the main items that have moved. So there's a reference there to a slippage on the window and roof replacement project at Lanark Library, Lindsay Institute Lanark, which is just under £500,000. And also there's an adjustment in respect of match funding of £1.8 million. So again, you can see the detail of that in the appendix at the rear of the paper. That relates to bids on levelling up projects, and the fact of the matter is the spend in terms of that match funding is highly unlikely to take place in the current year. So for that reason it's being slipped. So in terms of the recommendations in the paper, it looks for approval of the adjustments both to the general fund and to the housing programme. You can see there's an adjustment to the housing programme summarised at 5.2 in the paper. So it looks for agreement of those adjustments and that the position be noted on both programmes. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. Can I ask if there are any questions to Paul on this item? Allison. Councillor Allison.
Firstly, Joe, just wanted to highlight that the third round of the Levelling Up Fund has been announced and we have been successful, which is very much welcomed. It will be a significant contribution, one of the schemes that have been successful in Clydesdale. I think it's already been reported by other officers that the funding that we are now receiving from the UK government compared to what we got from Europe is about 3 times what it was. So it is going to make a significant difference and very much welcomed. And part of the question then is, what happens if can we bring that money back in if it is required before the end of the financial year? Because I believe the time constraints are quite tight for spending that money. And second question, I'll just ask you, Paul, when I'm speaking, the developers' contributions going from 7.5 million down to less than $1 million, is that funding that we've got that we are not now allocating in that year, or is it an expected reduction in the actual developers' contributions that are going to be paid to the council?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Allison. Taking each of those in turn, it's highly unlikely that that's going to be spent in the current financial year. Right? By the time we go through processes, what I'm talking about here is that £1.8 million match funding. If there was a circumstance where that was going to be the case, we would absolutely come back and bring that back in. Right? So that there's no risk to the wider projects that you've described through doing this just now. This is just the highest likelihood is it's not going to spend this year. In terms of the movement in developer contribution, the reason for that from the start of the year to this position ties back to the fact that we were given an amount of money in the current year as capital funding, but for a revenue purpose. And you might remember this. What this was to do with was funding for the pay award. Right, so there was an amount of money that was passed over by the government as capital grant, and councils took it on the basis that it was going to be for a revenue purpose. So it's for paying people, it's revenue expenditure. So we had to substitute between capital and revenue funding. Now, the most expedient way to do that is through an adjustment to developer contribution. It is not that any of the projects that would have been receiving developer contribution get any less money. It's just that it comes through capital grant and those other monies get used for a revenue purpose. So it's the shuffling about of money that we have to undertake because of how we were passed this funding by the government.
Okay. I'd be delighted to know the microphone didn't pick that up. Can I come now to Councillor McClyman?
Thanks, Chair. It was just under the Lanark Library, Lindsay Institute. Now, I know for a fact that the fabric of this building is really in a desperate situation, and staff and people who are using it are having to avoid puddles. We've got buckets everywhere. So fair enough, it's got to slip, but I would ask that it slip only into the spring and not into next winter, as we have a duty to look after this building, to keep it wind and water tight. It's a leased building, it doesn't belong to the council, it's no long lease, but I don't want to see this going on for another year. Thanks.
Stephen Gibson.
Yeah, thanks for the question and noted, and completely agree. The tenders come in over budget. We're working on that just now. We just can't get them approved or over the line before the end of this year, but it will be early next year, and we acknowledge that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Devlin.
Hi, it's purely for information, Chair. It's just Councillor Convery cannot get online, and I've asked Alan Faulkner to come on as a substitute for him. So he's trying to get on just now as well. Thanks. I know.
Thank you. I can advise that Councillor Faulkner is not actually a substitute on this meeting, so he won't be able to come and substitute for Councillor Convery. He's here only as an observer. Thank you.
Right. If that could be resolved elsewhere, I'll continue with the business. Councillor Cooper.
Well, it was really not on that business. It was on the urgent business. Since Councillor Convery can't get on, could we maybe nominate Councillor Devlin to present the motion in place of Councillor Convery?
I think we can, and we will deal with that at the appropriate time. But we'll make sure the urgent business is heard.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions in this report? Okay, I don't see any other questions. Can I ask that we agree the report? Are we agreed? To note the report, I should say. If I come now to item 5 on additional funding from Scottish Government and other external sources, and can I come back to Paul Manning to speak to that item?
Thanks, Chair. So there are two pieces of additional capital funding that are detailed in the report. They come to just under £580,000. One relates to Community Bus Fund, one relates to Switched On Fleet. They were actually both referred to in the previous capital monitoring paper. So in terms of recommendations, it's just to note the receipt of those two items. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions on that item? Councillor Shearer.
Thank you, Chair. Just to welcome the £500,000 coming from the Scottish Government for rural transport. Very welcome. I'm sure everybody around the table will appreciate that money. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should probably highlight at this point, I think we did in the back of the last council, we were going to undertake to give a further report at a future meeting on the Community Bus Fund as well. And I should also take the opportunity, given that I've done it in the press and publicly, also to say to the committee that we do indeed welcome the awards that have been made from the Levelling Up Fund, not just in respect to Clydesdale, but also in respect of that very significant project that we have to undertake to remediate land at Shawfield. Okay, if there are no other points, can we agree to note that report? And can I come now to item 6, which is our Employee Workforce Monitoring Report, and can I ask Michelle Milne to speak to that item? Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. This is a standard workforce monitoring report prepared by Personnel Services, which provides committee with an update on employment information for the period April to September 23. I'll highlight a few areas of the report and take you through that. At paragraph 4.1, maximising attendance, you will see that the council figure for the period is 4.7%, which is a decrease of 0.4% from the previous years, and there are further breakdowns within the report and comparisons to previous years, and positively there's an overall decrease in all areas detailed there. And whilst musculoskeletal and psychological conditions remain the main reasons for absence, you will see the breakdown there. And whilst musculoskeletal and psychological have increased by approximately 2,000 days, you will see that across the other areas there's been an overall decrease of just short of 10,500 days at 10,412. And just a few comments on that section. Members will be aware that managers do continue to follow the absence procedures, which include support for employees to remain at work and return to work as soon as possible, and support is provided by personnel teams to managers in dealing with absences. There has also been significant activity around employee assistance. Mental health first aid training has been rolled out, and we're doing train the trainer to be able to roll that out further. Through our new arrangement with PAM Wellbeing, there is also a new app that's been launched through the Employee Assistance Programme. I would encourage you to have a wee look at that. It also promotes a number of new features, for example, in-the-moment counselling, financial advice and online cognitive behavioural therapy. So it was just really to flag to you, which I'm sure you'll have seen, that that has been promoted during October and into the start of November. At paragraph 5, occupational health, you will see that there were 658 employees referred for medical examination, which is a slight decrease from the previous period. And there are 957 employees who attended physiotherapy, which is an increase. Importantly, of the 957 employees, 62% of employees have remained at work whilst undertaking treatment there. You'll see across employee support and counselling and employees referred for CBT, there has been an increase across those three areas of about 63 referrals. In terms of the medical referrals, there's been an increase in ill health retirement referrals, a more focused approach to supporting long-term absences. And through the launch of PAM, we have also reminded managers of the supports available and really actively promoting that at this minute, which is why some of those referrals have increased, and that's positive. Some of those conditions may be new, some may have been pre-existing, but what is demonstrating to us is that employees are accessing more of those supports, which is positive. In terms of accidents incidents, there were 683 accident incidents recorded, which is a decrease of 23 from that same period. Another data you'll see within the report. And again, just also to flag, and I'm sure members are aware of this, there is a joint working group looking at accidents and incidents within the council, which includes trade union colleagues, and it's focused both locally and nationally. We're also waiting updates in terms of what the Scottish Government are doing in terms of taking some activity forward there. We're also actively encouraging reporting in terms of reporting accidents and incidents, and reminding managers to kind of fully complete all the details required in that so that we can do more with that information that's provided to us. Again, just flagging a few areas around discipline, grievance and dignity at work. There was 89 disciplinary hearings, which was an increase of 26. And action was taken on 82 of these cases, and there's some further information detailed in the report on timescales and appeals. In terms of employee development, some high-level data included in the report at section 8.1. During this period, there were 4,025 attendances at classroom learning and development events, and there were also 1,685 attendances at virtual classroom learning and development events. As you know, we've been promoting Learn Online over a number of years now, and that continues to develop, and employees have successfully completed over 70,000 e-learning packages covering a wide range of subjects, which will continue to add to. In terms of labour turnover, you will see that kind of during that period, the turnover figure was 5.1%, which was a decrease of 0.4%. There were 382 leavers, and 31% of leavers completed the exit interview, either in person or online, to be able to get some information from that. And you'll see at section 9, again, a section you will be familiar with, which provides some information on employee information in terms of leavers and savings and vacant posts within there. And again, just to flag as well some of the posts that have been held for savings, which tends to relate to previous committee reports rather than the annual budget savings exercise. In terms of recruitment monitoring, again, just a few areas to highlight. 321 applicants who declared themselves as disabled, 169 were shortlisted for interview and 19 were appointed. 1,064 applicants from a black ethnic background. There were 365 who were shortlisted and 41 appointed. And in terms of veterans, there were 84 applicants and 42 were shortlisted and 3 were appointed. Really just refer committee back to a section in terms of recommendation, which is noting the content of the report, and happy to take any questions or provide further information if I'm not able to do that today.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions on this item? Can I come in the first instance to Richard Nelson? Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. It was firstly, the first question was about the long-term and short-term split. Is when short-term becomes long-term, what do you class as long-term? And the second point is in regards to the sickness absence rate and the percentage that you give. I think which would be helpful going forward is what the cost of that is to the council on that figure. So if it's 4.7, what cost does that give to this council? When you're sick, I get that, I appreciate that. When people are unwell, they certainly need to take time off, but I think it would be helpful to see what this actually costs the council, given that we're in a situation at the moment where every penny is a prisoner. So it'd be good to see what that monetary value is to that percentage.
Thank you. In terms of the classification, short-term absences are up to 4 weeks and long-term absences are beyond 4 weeks, and certainly take on board the point you made, and we can have a look at that in terms of what's possible around costings.
Could I just ask that the members are fed back on that, if that's possible, please?
I think we can get a follow-up circulated to members. Could I come to Councillor Allison?
Just to welcome, Chair, we have spoken a number of occasions in the past about the lack of veterans actually being employed. I see in today's paper, which I think is the first time I see 3 have been successful, and bearing in mind the importance we've placed on that in the past, I think it's good to highlight it and welcome that happening.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll note Councillor Allison's comments. Can I ask if there are any other questions on this item? I'm not seeing any other questions. Can we agree the report? Agreed. Can I come now to item 7, which is on the Community Plan Q4 Progress Report. And can I ask Jen Kerr to speak to this item? Jen.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Councillor Figan. Hi, I'm Jennifer Kerr. The purpose of this report is to advise the Executive Committee on the progress made against the outcomes of the new community plan in the year 2022 to 2023, as at the end of March. It presents the Community Planning Partnership's 4th quarter monitoring and annual report for your information and awareness. These reports were approved by the Community Planning Board on the 6th of September 2023. Section 4 outlines our future plans to continue to develop more detailed delivery plans alongside local partners and local communities that we work with. This work is underway through the Outcomes Leads Group in the Community Planning Partnership and our neighbourhood planning processes. Through this plan, the Council, as one of 5 responsible community planning bodies, will continue to meet its duty to deliver on outcomes it shares with community planning partners through community and neighbourhood plans. The progress to date has been very positive in the first year. The outcomes within the community plan are reported on within the annual report and in the Q4 report using the latest monitoring information available. It is important to note that the data within the report does not always refer to the current reporting year due to the timings of the data. But what is shown is the most recent data available, and it's a strength on the strength of which a judgment is made about whether or not the targets set in the community plan and the RAG indicators are likely to be achieved. Therefore, we're very pleased to say that the majority of our indicators against the community plan are green at this time. There are a few ambers, actually 2 of them relating to my own service under Caring and Connected Communities, about bringing together representatives of community-led plans in a networking event. We unfortunately just had some delays with staff, and that's in progress to be completed before the end of this year, so it will be green soon. We likewise have to bring together some communities to share priorities and work jointly on them. We're doing that through our community partnerships. And we've had now, at this point, that would be green if we were reporting today, as we've now established initial meetings for each of the 4 locality areas for each community partnership. There's likewise 1 amber and 1 red under the section of good quality sustainable housing for everyone, mostly due to the change in the circumstances around homelessness. But we would note the positive work done on prevention to make this amber, and that lots of work is being done in the housing service to review this and to continue to improve it. The forthcoming RRTP review will consider the need for a revised target to be set for this red indicator, which is to reduce the level of homelessness households at year end. Section 6 of the report outlines some of the key achievements that have taken place throughout this first year of the plan. And it outlines a series of case studies from the annual report. We're working together collaboratively with people, with communities, with a range of partners that has really delivered a positive impact that wouldn't have been achievable without partnership work. Collectively, we've helped young people participate. We've helped to create jobs through business development. We have helped people into jobs. We have created new homes, and we have improved neighbourhoods. The community planning partnerships have helped residents get through a cost of living crisis and have modernized service models and improved support for unpaid carers. The next steps in the second year, of the plan are working to improve our whole systems approaches, identifying where the range of resources from various different partners can further improve on the areas that we want to prioritise, those that were also the 3 priorities of the Verity House Agreement: tackling poverty, just transition at net zero, and sustainable public services. We look forward to sharing the second year report with you next year as we improve our ability to work together and produce transformative models of public service. So, recommendations for members are that you note the content of both reports and notably note the progress already being developed at PACE in its first year of this community plan and its first annual report. Thank you.
Can I thank Jen for that report? I see there are a number of questions which I'll come to. Before I do, I just wanted to make an observation of my own, and I think that this community planning space is where a great deal of our partnership and preventative work takes place, and that partnership and preventative work is most valuable, but valuable interventions have to be funded, and it is some of the work that is, and you look at some of the great achievements that we've got, but a lot of that poverty awareness and youth intervention, that work that we do with our partners, is at threat because of the budget position the Council finds itself in. And I would ask all members to reflect on that, particularly as we look to the outcome of today's autumn statement and much more significantly for this Council, the Scottish budget that takes place next month. And in addition, anticipate there'll be a number of questions about that red item that has been flagged in relation to homelessness, where it's important to say again that external factors are driving a housing crisis in this country, and we need well-resourced local government and also well-informed policy from central government if we are to address it. But I'll start to take some questions now. If I could come in the first instance to Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Jennifer for that report. My questions are on pages 114 and 115, I believe. It talks about the Larkhall Community Plan case study. My question would just be to ask for updates on a couple projects. So firstly, the Leisure Centre project. If there's any update on that information that can be given, that would be greatly appreciated. And also the King Street community space, an update on that as well would be great. And what the next steps are on that project and where are we in the if there's any timelines that could be given as well. Thank you.
I think if I could deal with the first item in particular, we are actively pursuing just now a funding solution to the Larkhall project, and we'll inform the local members in due course. But I'm going to pass over to officials to assist me with a response to the other questions. I'm just looking for a taker. I think David Booth, has been volunteered.
Thank you very much. I was concentrating on the Leisure Centre question there. Apologies. I wonder if Councillor Ross, you could repeat about King Street for me. Thanks. Bye.
So, Councillor Clark, you're going to have to just press your button again so I can bring you back in to repeat that last part of your question. Here we go. Just if you could repeat that last part of your question for David Booth.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to ask for an update on the King Street community space and what the next steps are, and if there's, you know, any timelines that can be given.
Okay, apologies. Thank you very much, Councillor Clark, for that. We're working along with the community groups just now on that, and I maybe need to come back to you with another update. I don't have an update on me at the moment about it, but I'll give you a written update on it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could I come now to Councillor Nelson?
Thank you, Chair. And regarding the King Street, I believe that Colin Park is doing some work with the community, and that might help to answer your question, David. In regards, it's great to see that the Larkhill Community Plan has got a good piece in the papers, and it's good to see the work that's actually been done by the local community in Larkhill, led by Nancy Barr and her team. I think the work that they're doing in that community is valuable, and it shows that their commitment to strengthening the community has to be shown as well. So again, I just wanted to make that point. We're discussing about the leisure centre, that's ongoing, and it's good to see that that is mentioned. I think the other point that Councillor Fagan made as well, the other point was about the homelessness, and I think it's well documented, and I did see the letter that Joe had sent to the MSP group, and I think we do need to be well funded within this council. If we don't, we're going to be in dire straits. So more or less just a comment. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Can I come now to Councillor Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Can I come in on the homelessness thing as well? Because clearly the extent of the change there with the baseline figures going from 892 to 1331 is quite substantial. And the comment has been one of changing the target. Well, that's understandable, and no particular difficulty with that. But the core thing behind that is really being able to focus as much as we can on being able to deal with the homelessness issues, etc., against the background that you've rightly said. I wonder if it might be appropriate, I'm not quite sure what's gone to housing on this so far, but if to have a real close look at this in terms of the drivers, the particular aspects in South Lanarkshire, you know, the kind of nature of the problem. I know some of this is to do with mortgage repossession and issues of that kind that are emerging from the financial crisis as well. And I think if I maybe make an observation as well, what was said in the report about the contribution of economic development to this, I think is quite important too, because reasonably clearly we've been quite successful in being able to create jobs, to sustain jobs through the activities of our economic development unit, amongst others. And I think it's very important that we actually remember as well the linkage between that and the ability to avoid homelessness in the first place. So it's just observation, but comment as well on the homelessness thing. Can we focus a bit on that one in terms of maybe a further report to this committee, to the Housing Committee as appropriate, on the details of that?
And I am reliably informed that I think Sharon is in the room, but I understand that Head of Housing is preparing a report on that very issue as we speak. Okay, can I now come to Councillor Walker?
Homelessness is due to various factors, but it is very worrying in this day and age. Homelessness can cause a whole plethora of problems that has a crossover and an impact into other services, specifically social work. When you look at the effect of homelessness in children, families, mental health, so it's got an impact across the system and across different services. And quite frankly, I mean, it's an unacceptable situation in this day and age that we're not able to, provide shelter and houses and security to people. So I agree. I would also echo what Robert said and ask for a further analysis of it and look at what the various causes are. I mean, obviously there is issues relating to the kind of rise in mortgages and also rents in the private sector, which are unaffordable for most people. So I don't know if that's something that we need to be lobbying the Scottish Government in relation to that, and is there anything that can be done in terms of capping the rent levels or looking at providing more mixed tenure developments, social rented housing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things maybe that the Scottish Government could be doing here to relieve that. And also in terms of economic development, are the developers making sufficient contributions in terms of affordable housing as part of, you know, owner-occupied developments? I mean, if you look at the rate of house building across South Lanarkshire, particularly in the growth areas like Newton, are we really getting as much bang for our buck as we could be from the developers? So I think there are a number of areas we could be looking at in relation to this, but it is very, very worrying in terms of the health impact, the impact on children and young people falling further behind if they're not able to study properly, do homework properly. It's quite frankly socially very harmful. So I would just leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to come over now to Sharon just to respond to some of those points, and then I'll take our final question. Sharon.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Brown and Councillor Walker. I appreciate that. And I agree completely with your sentiments about what you're saying. So we've already started kind of a deep dive and some projections in terms of homelessness. So nationally, we've seen a 9% increase in homelessness across Scotland, but South Lanarkshire have seen 19% increase. So we've already started to kind of look into to see what are the reasons that people are approaching us and needing that service. There's no one specific reason, and initially we thought, is it a result of the private rented sector? But actually what's happening in the private rented sector is meaning it's no longer accessible. So people who would have normally went into the private rented sector are coming to us. So just kind of some of the figures you picked up on. Our rapid rehousing transition plan was doing absolutely great in its third year. In March 2022, last year, we were sitting just under 800 homeless households. The latest position is 1,568, so it continues to grow and is concerning. I met yesterday with the Scottish Government and we were discussing the need for multi-year funding so that we can systematically change or end homelessness. So previously our rapid rehousing funding has been allocated on an annual basis, and we get the announcement of that following the Scottish Government budget in December. But we're now we're pushing on that, and as our other local authorities who have been affected similar to us, one of them is Fife, who we work very closely with in terms of what initiatives can we do, our Housing First, what can we do to try and prevent homelessness as much as possible. So absolutely, I'm taking a report to our corporate management team tomorrow, and then I will feedback here as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Sharon, for that response. Can I come now to Councillor Logan?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the responses to some of the questions. Could I ask, a few years ago, councils was allowed to sort of set out their own stall on how they would deal with homelessness and set it out, send it to the Scottish Government, and then if it was agreeable, that was fine. And then there was, I can't remember the dates, but there was a thing about rough sleepers and cities and different things like that, and the targets was different. Now, there's nothing more heartbreaking to go to, say, Glasgow, Edinburgh, the big cities, and you see rough sleepers. It's horrible to see in this day and age that we still have, you know, people in the actually living on the streets. But at that time, I thought it was they took a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and they should have allowed councils to still have discretion to make their decisions on what was happening within their own areas. So I always thought that the targets was a bit skewed. But as been said already, there is a lot of different issues regarding homelessness. And it's not just people on the street, it is people living within households. If you have a surgery, just a small example, a girl, set of twins, another child, 3 children, she's a single mother, lives with her mother. The mother would be quite happy for that girl to be rehoused from her home, but it all became too much because we could never get to that girl, because we had the targets that were set for the council were so high that it was just every house that came in, 3-bedded house, it had to go to the homeless list. So other factor in this whole thing is that we cannot get to people who are sitting and say a bigger house, to give them a smaller house, to free that up for other, other families, maybe the homeless family, or to take that house. So there's a vicious circle that we can't seem to break, and we haven't been breaking it for quite a wee while. So if every house has really basically gone to the priority housing list, then we're not getting this complete circle. And that's only, I could give you loads because folk come through my door all the time, as you probably know. But that's just one where that could have been avoided if we could have had a better mixture and balance. So I would like really to know who sets the targets. Well, I know who sets them. And is there any way that this council can set out its stall to say, well, really and truly, we're not like Glasgow because, or our problems are this, and set up a system which would be agreeable to the Scottish Government and to us. Because one of the nuts that we need to crack for ourselves is how can we free up more houses so that you get, say 5 moves out of one house where you're moving this one and that one and the next one. And it used to be that we could do that, but it seems to be that it's no, to meet your targets, that's no helpful. And the other thing that I really want to ask about, this morning on the radio coming here, one of the early morning shows, there is a crisis now looming on a requirement for houses, as is in here, people who have come into the country fleeing war or migrants coming in over the channel. And I always think you must be desperate if you're going to sit in a wee boat to, take your chance coming over. So everybody's in need, and I understand that. But if we're not meeting targets and we're up at what you're saying, 19%, how do we cope with issues like that without getting extra funding and all the various things? Now, we could tinker away buying back council houses, that's fine, but that's never going to cope with the situation that we're in. So I actually think that if it's not still it's one shoe fits everybody, then that's something else that we should be pushing, because there's more to come down the line. I know through my weekly surgery, and it's also been said, there's a crisis in monetary crisis. People actually not even managing from wage to wage. There's certainly a week before the wage comes in, or their wages come in, they're really, really, really struggling, and they're putting a face in it. So it's a huge, huge problem. It's only just starting, in my opinion, and it will continue to get worse. But that was my views, is that I felt, whenever it was, that we were caught up in something at that point that really we shouldn't have been caught up in, because we were, well, you said it yourself, we were actually managing fine. But also the added burdens that the governments are putting on us, they need to step up and they need to fund it as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I move on, I'm going to come to Cleland just now, just to respond to some of that.
Thanks, Chair, and to give Sharon a heads up, because I'll maybe come across to Sharon just about how difficult it is to get the balance right between households being allocated, homeless households being allocated housing, as opposed to waiting list or transfers. The points I'd maybe want to just pick up, first of all, it actually is maybe less about targets and more about statutory duties. Councils have got a range of statutory duties where we are legally obliged to provide service to homeless households. We're also obliged through a range of humanitarian programmes to provide support, and that includes the asylum dispersal programmes. Just a bit of information for members, and this will be picked up in Sharon's ultimate paper that comes to Housing and Tech Committee. There is some significant work taking place at a national level that colleagues like Sharon and others in the Alacho network will be playing into. But effectively, what I believe is coming to COSLA leaders is a proposal for a national strategic oversight group that COSLA and local government will co-chair with the Scottish Government and have representation in from the UK Government. What we need and what was provided earlier this year by the Solace report is one single picture of all challenges. So that picks up domestic homelessness, it picks up domestic waiting lists, those waiting for transfers because their housing is inappropriate, but it also takes into consideration the cumulative effect of a wide range of humanitarian programmes that we participate in, and also the announcements by the UK Government on asylum dispersal, and ultimately how those individuals who are given leave to remain following assessment of their asylum application are subsequently accommodated. So I think the picture that Sharon's report will set out just shows how difficult this challenge is right across all local government. If I could actually quote one of our neighbouring local authorities to give an indication of some of the pressures. It's not that we don't have our own pressures, we certainly do. But I believe Glasgow City Council about 6 weeks ago took a paper through their committee indicating a projected overspend of £57 million on their homelessness budget next year. Now, no matter how big the authority is, nobody can sustain that as an individual pressure. And what we are already seeing, but we'll probably see in an increasing amount, is that there will be a bit of overflow when the city is unable to support those who present to them, and neighbouring authorities will be further impacted. Final thing I'm going to say before I kick over to Sharon to get a proper answer is just around some of the legislative proposals that were outlined in the Solace report. There are certain things that are in the gift of governments, plural, right now that would certainly improve the situation. One is the removal of the local connection. That was something that was implemented in recent years. It means that you no longer have to have a local connection to present to an individual local authority area. And the local authority has a statutory duty to support you and assess your homeless application regardless of whether you've got any connection with the area. That's applying a disproportionate pressure to different areas in Scotland. And it's something that we think in the current context should be temporarily paused. So that's one amongst 39 recommendations that's in the Solace report that we would hope to engage with both governments through that national group. But Chair, with your permission, I'll maybe kick over to Sharon just about that specific point from Councillor Logan about the challenge in getting the balance right between transfers and homeless presentations.
Thanks, Cleland. Thanks, Councillor Logan. So currently our letting plans is that we'll allocate between 60 and 65% of our properties to those in urgent need. Now that includes those with a medical need as well as those who have got the homelessness statutory duty. We are achieving that target. We're on track year to date for that, and we will bring the new local letting plans to Housing and Tech Committee in February. So there'll be an opportunity then to discuss that. And we always strive to achieve that balance, as Cleland has said, around ensuring we try and allocate a small percentage of lets to the waiting list, which would help families like you've discussed. But the main, we try and keep a percentage of lets to the transfer list because that'll keep our secondary lets and that turnover. Now, during the summer months, we've tried to minimise some of that, and that was linked to our response to the backlog and our voids. So we tried to allocate as many to homelessness and keep throughput in the homelessness service. Our temporary accommodation was quite backlogged at the start of the summer. However, we've seen changes to that, and we now have nobody in bed and breakfast this week, so it's really, really positive. And that's something I continue to monitor on a weekly basis. Cleland's probably touched on all of your other points there, but just kind of quickly, so in terms of rough sleeping, as I mentioned, we've got a statutory responsibility through homelessness, and as South Lanarkshire Council, I'm proud to say we do accommodate an hour out of our service, will place people in bed and breakfast if and when they do present at any time. We are monitoring overspill from that. So as Cleland alluded to there, the removal of the local connection, we are now seeing people from Glasgow come to South Lanarkshire. So we are monitoring that. And we have regular meetings with Glasgow City Council, and I met last week with North Lanarkshire Council, just our peers, kind of boundary local authorities partners, and we're tracking that. So we've had approximately 100 households present to South Lanarkshire since the start of the financial year from Outwith. I raised that yesterday with the Scottish Government because they're looking for more and more evidence in order to implement local connection and put that back in force. And they're looking to see how many people from South Lanarkshire have presented elsewhere. And the latest figure I seen yesterday is roughly about 15, 16 people have left our local authority to go elsewhere. So in contrast, we're still seeing a difference. So those discussions with the Scottish Government are ongoing and alongside the paper from Solace. And you mentioned as well around the asylum and refugee. There was the Asylum Partnership Board met yesterday, and we have asked the Home Office for the most updated heat map so that we can plan for realistic numbers that will present to South Lanarkshire or have a decision to remain in the coming months, and that allows us to plan temporary accommodation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I said that would be the last question, but David McLachlan, as the Chair of Housing, has indicated he wants to come in at this point, so I'll just pass over to Davy. Councillor McLachlan.
Davy's fine. It's two things. It's a local connections issue. There was responses sent from chairs of housing to the Housing Minister outlining the concerns, and in particular it's a really adverse effect on this local authority because they're so close to Glasgow, as intimated by Cleland. So I've seen responses from many other chairs of housing who have got the same concerns, and the Minister's looking at that, so I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. The other issue about funding, Sharon touched on it earlier. We lost out on an opportunity of some funding, even though we're really struggling right now, but the funding was allocated based on a historical figure when our figures were lower, so that's not fair either, and that's been communicated to the Minister. I've had a response. Sharon, maybe you could elaborate, but you've got more recent update on that, but that's two factors that's really having an adverse impact on us, and I'm concerned about it. And I wonder, Sharon, could you maybe even just update on that again? Just thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Sharon.
Thanks, Councillor McLachlan. So yeah, there was £2 million additional funding available from the Scottish Government this year, and it was to support temporary accommodation. Initially, when Davy and I met with the Minister, the discussion was around the top 5 or 6 local authorities that were impacted by temporary accommodation needs, and more specifically, children in temporary accommodation, which we've been recognised as the 5th worst local authority affected by that so far this financial year. So we were welcoming the fact that we would have got a share of that £2 million. Yes, it wouldn't have been transformational, but it would have supported the costs that we did to increase our temporary accommodation. However, I think following further discussion within Scottish Government and with COSLA, it was agreed that it would 5 local authorities benefiting from that money wasn't favoured, and they changed the formula, and it was based on 15 local authorities who had the highest homeless caseload last financial year. Now, we didn't see the spike in homelessness until the latter half of 2022-23, so we were not in the top 15 there, so we lost out in that. And we have, Davy has responded as well to Scottish Government to just note our disappointment. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I think that was a very useful and very comprehensive discussion about the developing homelessness crisis that we are seeing. We are not the only, as you'll have gathered from that discussion, the only local authority to be in this position, although Sharon's just explained some of the timing of how that has manifested in South Lanarkshire. But I'd reiterate the point I made earlier, that we have to be a well-resourced local authority, but we also have to have well-informed policy. And I suppose the encouragement that I take from what we've discussed today is that our people at an official level, at a political level, are engaging with the Scottish Government to make sure that emerging policy to deal with this crisis is as well informed as possible, because that's what gets the best outcomes on the ground. So can I thank everyone for their contributions? Can we agree the report? Right. Okay, can I come now to next item, and this is on cost of living support. Oh, apologies. I've misplaced my agenda because of all that discussion there. Could I come now to the next item, sorry, which is not cost of living support. It is the first of our items for decision. It is the land and property transfers and disposals. And can I ask Stephen Gibson to speak to that item? Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I thought you'd missed me out there. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval for a disposal of 5 minor assets that are held within the HRA, and they are minor. When you look at Appendix A, you'll see the combined size of them is just about 300 square metres. In each case, the proposals are linked to garden extensions, garden improvements, although one of them does talk about, I suppose, subject to planning, building a garage. The background is set out in Section 4. It confirms that they're all classed as minor disposals and each have a value of less than £100,000. The description of each of the assets is set out in Appendix A. It tells you the size, it gives an indication of the value, and it gives you the intended uses. We're going to go in a while to talk about budgets and finance, and I'd love to come to you with good news, but the financial implications aren't great. These will not generate a huge capital receipt, but the capital receipt will be retained by the HRA. The recommendations are in Section 2, and these are asking for approval for the Executive Committee to declare them surplus, and that will allow the allow the Council's Estate section to proceed with the disposal of the 5 assets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Are there any questions on that item? There are not. Can we agree the report? We're agreed. I will now come to item 9 on cost of living support, and can I ask Paul Manning to speak to that item? Paul.
Thanks, Chair. So the paper picks up on some of the themes that have been discussed this morning, and it also follows on from reports that were brought to the Executive Committee last year and an update that was given earlier on this year. The purpose of this is to provide the committee with an overview of the support provided to households in South Lanarkshire in response to the cost of living crisis, and also to seek agreement for the direction of funds to support further activity. So the report goes through 4 areas of support that are being given, and then in the 5th part of the report, it offers these proposals around an amount of money that's available. So if I take each of the 4 areas in turn, first of all, this is at the foot of the first page of the paper. It talks about the Money Matters Advice Service, and it talks about some of the work that's being done there, distributing 8,600 cash vouchers to the value of £50 through the Financial Wellbeing Support Fund. It also goes on to talk about work with other organisations in terms of energy vouchers, and also referrals through Advice Direct Scotland. At 4.14, it picks up the numbers of clients who have gone through benefit, debt and money advice. So you can see those relative numbers there. And then at 4.15, following on from that, it gives details of the financial gain for the first 6 months of 2023-24 in that table. At 4.16, it covers the year-on-year movement. So what you can see there is that in the first 6 months of this year, the amount of debt dealt with was just under £6.4 million. But for the whole of last year, the equivalent figure was just under £7.5 million. So you can see the way that is moving year on year. So the second part of the paper looks at benefits and revenues. So it covers off a council tax reduction, and you can see there at the end of that first paragraph, it talks about the value this year in comparison to last year, and it refers to a slight increase in caseload. 4.22 talks about the Scottish Welfare Fund, and it says that although the volume of applications is 10% lower than last year, there are still 17% higher than the corresponding pre-COVID level. So in comparison to the period pre-2020, there is a step change. The paper goes on to talk about housing benefit and discretionary housing benefit, and then at the foot of that second page, it talks about the amounts of money given out in respect of school clothing grants, preschool meal payments, and payments for school strike days as well. So you can see those at the foot of that second page. The third area of the paper talks about support for tenants, and again follows on with some of the themes in the discussion this morning. So it talks about the Tenancy Sustainment Fund, it talks about the work of the Rent Income Support Team within housing, and there at 434 it refers to the pressure on the Council's homelessness service. The fourth part of this paper in terms of the supports talks about school meal debt, and you can see the amount of money that's been written off there, and the considerations continue between finance and corporate and education resources, and the point is made there that the Council continues to provide a school meal for all children who require one, even if they're unable to pay on the day. Now, this fifth section of the paper, which begins at section 4.5, talks about support for food banks. And first of all, it gives some statistics in terms of the demand on food banks. Compared to the first 6 months of 2022-23, there has been a 29% rise in the number of households referred to local food banks, the number of children increasing similarly. So the first proposal that's in here is that it's proposed that another £28,000 is allocated to go towards food banks. And that refers to 7 food banks in operation within the area, each benefiting from a cash payment of £4,000. The second proposal relates to a looked after children payment. And as it says at 461, it's proposed that a further £100 payment is provided to each looked after young person currently supported. And it also refers to an amount of money being provided through Who Cares Scotland. And there's a full description of that, obviously, at 461. And the third proposal is around allocating £10,000 to another production run of a booklet that was produced last year and was very well received, called Money is Not the Only Problem. So the proposal there is that £10,000 be made available to cover the costs of a further production run of 20,000 copies. So you've got an update on 4 areas of activity there, and as I say, the fifth section covers these proposals. In terms of the recommendation, it looks for noting of that work and that allocation of 173,000 towards those 3 purposes be agreed. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that report. Paul, can I ask if there are any questions to Paul at this point? Can I come in the first instance to Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a sobering report, and it highlights just exactly what we were discussing 5-10 minutes ago. This is the realities that people are facing in their day-to-day lives, and I think everything that's here is absolutely required. And for myself, I have to say that if the very last thing that the last people standing for me would be Money Matters. I cannot ever underestimate what Money Matters does for the people of South Lanarkshire. They are an absolute godsend to a lot of people. They're excellent at what they do. I have never ever had anybody come back to say that they didn't get a good service and good help. And again, anecdotal, because I'm always talking to people, but a lady whose husband had to go into care was quite distraught, and I said, go to Money Matters and speak to them. And she's a different lady when I was speaking to her on the help that she got and how nice they were to her. So it's quite sobering that this is there, but it's quite good to know that we have got a service that is so appreciated by everyone who goes to them. And as I say, for me, that would be they would be the last people standing, because we need them, 100% need them, and everybody else that's here helping people. But for the council, they're an excellent service. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions or points on this item? I'm not seeing any. Can we agree the report? We're agreed. Can I come now? I'm conscious of time, but I'm also conscious there are only a number of 3 more items to get through. Could I suggest at this point maybe have a short 10-minute comfort break before we get into the rest of the agenda? Is that people agreed? Okay. So we'll reconvene at 25 minutes past. Okay. Well, thank you everyone. If I could restart the meeting just now on item 10. I'm just going to check, do we need to take a sediment again?
Checking that already, Chair, so it's fine.
We're checking that already, that's in progress. So we will restart the meeting now. Come to item 10 on the revenue budget update and savings proposals and ask Paul Manning to speak to this report.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So, as the document says at the beginning, that the purpose of this is to advise members of the position in the budget for 24-25, including an update to the strategy and the savings proposals. Now, I'm not proposing to talk through this paper in detail. What you've got in front of you is, to all intents and purposes, the same document that went to the members' seminar a couple of weeks ago. I'll run through the recommendations. Before I do that, you will note from recommendation 4 that this report is not asking you to approve savings proposals, but to note them. I wouldn't normally seek approval on savings proposals without a grant settlement. And what the paper does say, and this is on page 142, at section 8.11 under next steps, around those next steps, the Council expects to receive its 24-25 local government settlement in December. And then the paper describes the budget process thereafter. I expect to get our grant settlement figure in the week before Christmas. And remember, that becomes even more important because that grant settlement should include the reimbursement in respect of a council tax freeze. So, just before I go through the recommendations, you'll note that Tom Little distributed a paper on the first stage of the budget consultation process earlier in the week. So Tom's obviously along and can answer any questions on that. The recommendations as they are in front of you are that the update to the budget strategy covering anticipated pay, award funding, pension contribution benefits and the expected outcomes from the probable outturn exercise be approved, that the remaining budget gap of £20.7 million be noted, that the savings that require to be achieved over the 4-year period of £96 million be noted. As I said a second ago, that the savings proposals of £18.589 million covered in section 6 be noted, and that final recommendation that the consultation on the distance qualification criteria for mainstream school transport in section 7 be approved. So, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. See, before I open this up to questions, I'm just wondering, would Tom like to give the committee just the sort of highlights from that report from the first stage of the consultation that we've undertaken? Bear in mind, this is the first stage of a consultation from before we have published the savings proposals. That is a further stage that will now take place. But Tom, do you just want to highlight anything from that report that would be helpful for us just now?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm happy to give you a express talk through the consultation results that I sent round to all elected members. And I'd make the point that the intention is to make these public too. Didn't want to do so before councillors had a chance to review them themselves, but our intention is to put all the content onto the website, and that will be in tandem with a second phase of consultation to follow on specific proposals, options that will be before councillors. Because the initial consultation was by its nature quite high level, because those options hadn't at that stage been published. So that dictated what we asked people and the kind of way that we asked them it. So, as I say, a quick trot through, you'll have seen we had more than 2,100 responses, almost exclusively responses on our online survey, although we did make efforts to give people other ways of communicating with us on this. Not all responders gave a response to all answers, which is why sometimes you see the numbers don't always add up. But the main outcomes were that we got strong support for our priorities as expressed in our council plan. 82.9% of people said they supported, they agreed those remained the correct priorities. We asked people what their number one priorities were across a range of services. We asked that in two kind of time frames. We asked them what their priorities were now, and to help us plan, to think about what those priorities might be in 15 years' time. No great surprise, I think, the councillors share that the top three in both of those league tables, if you want to call them that, were schools, adult social care and children's social care. If you happen to have the briefing notice sent round you in front of you, you'll remember even the league table, again, that we kind of put together, a colour-coded thing that showed where every service was prioritised in terms of 1 to 10 across the whole gamut. So again, did that for now and for 15 years' time. Other questions we posed were, did respondents agree the Council's approach to reducing the budget gap so far has been correct? And we had almost 2/3 of people said yes, they agreed with that. We had just under 2/3 agreed that the Council has to look at all options to bridge the gap, including increases in charges and council tax to look at. We asked a specific question on council tax, which I think was quite interesting. The feedback we got from that, we gave people a range of options from 0% to 10%, what they would think was an appropriate level for council tax to go up next year. We set that question before the council tax freeze was announced by the Scottish Government, but we let it run just to see what people thought. So 19% of people went for 0%. So that's the council freeze, people who support the council tax freeze, if you like. Of the remainder, those who did support an increase in council tax, we found that 1/3 of those backed a 5% increase in council tax. And overall, 56%, so over half, went for between 5% and 10%, including 13% of those who supported a rise who went for the highest option we provided of 10%. So I gave councillors a full breakdown of those numbers, that's essentially it from this survey. I would say our intention is to be more specific in the second phase of consultation that will happen now. We will let that run throughout December and well into January. There will be an emphasis again on an online survey, but we will be making even greater efforts to reach people through community meetings, through the community engagement team and others, to give people a chance to respond offline or use our equipment to respond online if they aren't able to do so themselves. And we will be asking specific questions about the savings options that are before elected members as they look to balance the budget next year. I will share details of that consultation with all elected members as it goes live, so you can hopefully help us promote it through your own networks. And of course, we'll come back to you with the full details of the responses we get from that consultation too, before you have to make any decisions. Happy to take any specific questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. And if anyone has any questions or contributions to make, can I ask you to indicate so now. Before we proceed, I just want to make some observations of my own. And I think it is reassuring to know that the public agree with the strategic direction in which we're trying to take the council. But as with so many of our strategies, that has to be funded. And local government is underfunded in this country. And we're underfunded right now for two reasons. We have what I keep calling the twin terrors, that inflation, which thankfully is coming down, but it's still too high. And we also have the longer term issue, that chronic underfunding that actually puts us in a position where we struggle to absorb some of these big cost rises that we see just now. One of the really interesting findings in that report that I think should serve as a wake-up to certain people in Scottish politics is that only less than a fifth of people who responded to the survey supported a 0% increase in council tax. Now, I thought that was very interesting. And I think it says something about the people of South Lanarkshire that even when they are facing the cost of living pressures that we have just discussed at length in this committee today, that a number of them are still prepared to make a contribution, an increased contribution in council tax. And I think that is because they can see that the social harm and destruction that has been caused by many of the savings this council will ultimately have to consider over the coming weeks is worse than the costs of paying a bit more in council tax. And there is a debate, as there always would be a debate about what is an appropriate level of council tax. And we balance out the needs of the community, the needs of household incomes, the needs of the council. We don't have a definitive view about what an increase in council tax should be this year, and the government have neutralised that issue to some extent by announcing a council tax freeze. However, that council tax freeze has to be fully funded, and an assurance from the First Minister that a council tax freeze will be fully funded is very different from seeing in black and white an assurance in a statement from government in raw numbers that we have a fully funded settlement, and that fully funded council tax rise is not coming at the detriment of other parts of the council budgets. Because if it is not fully funded in those terms, with no other detriment to council budgets, then we will still have to make some horrendous and socially harmful cuts to people's services. It really is over to our MSPs to make sure local government can get through this funding crisis. All eyes are on them, and all eyes are on the budget that's coming up next month. They have to sort out the chaos they've got themselves into over the council tax, and they have to address the long-term underfunding of Scotland's councils. Because when you look at the kind of savings that are in these appendices, to youth services, to ground services, to core services, to education, those are not cuts any of us want to make, and that so far no political group in this council has adopted, but they are a consequence of decisions that are taken in the Scottish Parliament. And if we do not get a better settlement from the Scottish Parliament, then bluntly, we should be holding our MSPs to account for the damage that they have done to the communities and the services and our workforce here in South Lanarkshire. They should not vote for another anti-council, anti-community budget. Rant over. The next point I want to make is just about one of the recommendations. So these recommendations largely relate, 1 to 4 relate to this year's budget setting process. There is a 5th recommendation that relates to school transport, and that is not a saving we are asked to approve today. It is a statutory consultation we are asked to approve today, and it's a statutory consultation that would have a lead-in time into the next financial year and beyond, and over academic years. You will have seen yesterday information circulated in response to a budget query that breaks down the proposed £2 million saving that could come if the option to change the distance qualification criteria were to be approved. It breaks that down to a £400,000 saving in relation to primary and a £1.6 million saving in relation to secondary. I would like to move the paper, but with a small adjustment, and it is at recommendation 5 that we exclude primary from the consultation on distance criteria for mainstream school transport. That would come out of the paper. The consultation would proceed on the basis that only the secondary stage is included. And I would reiterate that at this point we are simply approving the consultation. Any decision making around the policy would follow once the statutory consultation has taken place. So that is the recommendation I would move. I believe Councillor Devlin she's just indicating that she would second it. But before we come to conclude, I'm aware that we have a number of questions and points to take. Councillor Cooper.
Okay, I'll start with the school transport one. I know we're looking at a consultation, and I'm happy to endorse that and agree with that. I wondered if it would be possible for us to get a report from our road safety transport group, who I think were dealing with the issue of the volume of cars that are around about our schools, because were this to go ahead, a consequence of that could be that there are more cars dropping children or young people off at school. And some of our secondaries are really difficult. Well, I know in particular, Straven Academy, access for cars, etc., is extremely difficult. We looked at, I think there was discussions ongoing regarding exclusion zones around certain parts of the schools regarding cars, and I wondered how far they had got with that, because in some ways it'd be good for the two things to run in tandem, where the council to agree to the ultimate proposal regarding secondary transport. The second point I wanted to make was in regard to the council tax freeze, and there are a number of rumours ongoing at the moment regarding whether the Scottish Government are going to change their policy on councils reducing their teacher numbers. And I wondered whether anybody had any further information on that, whether that's just a rumour at the moment or whether there's any validity in what's being said. Thank you.
Okay. I think there are 2 points in there, and I think in the first point, the safe routes to school and the very issues that you've described would form part of any consultation exercise that would take place afterwards, and that will be set out in the document. On your second point, I'm going to come to Paul Manning to just deal with that question. Paul.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Cooper. There is a wee bit of content in the paper about the question that you're asking on savings which impact on teacher numbers. So at section 6.6, it does say that the package of savings includes 2 savings which impact on teacher numbers. So you can see those referenced there. And then it says after that, we have not been advised of any restrictions around reducing teacher numbers in 2024-25. So the arrangement that I've described at committee across the past few months, whereby there was an amount of money held back by the government depending on the outcome of the teacher's census. The information that we have is that that doesn't apply for year 2024-25. So we're operating within the climate that we are, but I'm flagging there are 2 savings in there that relate to teacher numbers.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I come back to Councillor Cooper?
Just to come in on that again, Paul, we would be wishing to take that as a saving against the overall budget challenges that we have. But there would appear to be a suggestion that the Scottish Government are saying that that money which should be used in regard to the freeze on council tax. So we wouldn't actually gain it as a saving as a council. We would have to use it to offset the council tax freeze.
I'll maybe just ask Paul Manning to clarify that one. Paul?
Okay, that's not something I'm aware of, Councillor Cooper. Okay, so the way this is laid out in the paper is as we believe the situation to be, we would make a saving that could contribute towards closing our budget gap. I haven't heard any suggestion that savings relating to teacher numbers would be in any way ring-fenced towards a contribution to the council tax freeze.
Can I maybe just help to say that the COSLA leaders are meeting this week? We obviously want to ensure, not least given my earlier comments, that there is absolute transparency about any funding deal that is struck up around council tax freeze, or indeed the ongoing issue of teacher numbers. But can I suggest that what we do is watch this space and we look to see how rumour becomes reality and what the eventual product is in terms of grant and any strings that might be attached, and we will obviously continue to lobby for as much transparency in the process as possible. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Joe. First of all, congratulate Tom on once again a very detailed report managing to come out. There's always a but. If my figures are right, Tom, less than 1% of the voting public contributed to this. That can, when you've a low percentage like that, you can skew, the figures can be skewed. Is there any way of looking at categories of who have contributed? Obvious one I always pick up is rural and urban areas. And there may be other areas that you can look at to get a clearer understanding of where people are wishing to go. It does not denigrate what you've done, but I think it may give us a clearer view on who's thinking what. because I'd be really surprised if potholes were as far down the list in a rural area as what they are on this list. Can I then move on to agree with you, Joe, regarding taking the primary schools out the consultation for school transport? I don't think any of us like having it in there. Sorry, that whole item 5 in there. Do not think that we have any alternative just now but to look at all opportunities. Sorry if I'm calling it an opportunity, in how we take this forward. Because if we don't identify savings to mitigate the £4 million, I think it is, increase in transport costs, it could cost us very dearly elsewhere. Cleland, you've been very clear in the past about us needing to make some very satisfactory decisions, and this is certainly one of them. It's important to look into it because there are very few options within the education budget where we will not be damaging education and taking funding out.
Okay. Thank you very much. I might just ask Tom to respond to the point about the consultation and otherwise note the comments that were made. So, Tom.
Thanks, Councillor Allison. You make some very good points, and I would actually echo some of what you're saying. I was quite pleased with the 2,000 plus returns we got, but you have to look at that in the context of a population of 350,000 people in South Lanarkshire. We are going to always struggle to get to everyone and not bust any kind of budget further than we're already facing. So what we try and do is give you enough information to help illustrate the situation. You will know from your own contacts, as much as you're probably going to get from our consultation. What we're trying to do is just give you additional information to another layer to what you'll know yourselves. Specifically on rurality, etc., because the first phase was quite a high level consultation, we chose not to include some questions that we will include in the second phase. In the second phase, we will be asking people to tell us where they live. We'll be asking them for some of their own details in terms of age profile, etc. So that will give us, again, additional layers of information that we should be able to work back to you around who's saying what about specific proposals.
Okay, thank you. And can I come to Councillor Walker?
Just to thank Tom for that report. I thought it was really well laid out and was very clear in terms of highlighting people's priorities, particularly in relation to the priorities within the council's plan. So thank you for that. I do appreciate Alex's point. Surveys are always a limited amount in terms of the population, but it is a snapshot and a guide to the way people are feeling. And I think it would be interesting to know if across Scotland other surveys have been done that have highlighted that people would be prepared to pay more in terms of the council tax. That would be really interesting to get a picture of that across Scotland. But just on the council tax, the chair covered some of my points. I mean, so much for the Verity House Agreement principle. Once again, we continue down the road of removing flexibility and autonomy from local authorities to fund their public services and to prioritise according to their own local area. So the commitment to that didn't last long. But I get very nervous when I hear the First Minister pledging to fund something, having had experiences through the IGB of the 330 million that they stole off us from or clawed back from us in relation to COVID monies, and experiences of trying to negotiate with them around that, and some of the misinformation that comes out about funding, and obviously the history of ring fence and short-term planning, all the rest of it. So, I mean, I think my point was just to echo the chair's point. We need specific detail on how the First Minister intends to fund the council freeze, so that we know exactly where we are when we know the final settlement, and we can go ahead from there in terms of the financial situation in South Lanarkshire, but I get very, very nervous when I hear the Scottish Government saying they're going to, fund something and cover it. So I think we should be pressing them just to provide the detail behind that and to explain exactly how they're going to cover that as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay. I have another question out from John Ross.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's not so much a question, it's really a comment. I'm listening to the meeting this morning, and all I'm hearing is innuendos and speculation about what the Scottish Government are going to do or not going to do, and casting doubt on just exactly where we're going here. We have a COSLA board set up to look at these things and look after our interests as best as possible. We're way ahead of the game here in what we're discussing this morning, and I really think it doesn't do us any good whatsoever talking about this at this present time until we hear a wee bit more flesh in the bone going forward. And it really upsets me to hear people casting aspirations on the Scottish Government when they really don't have anything to back that up. Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, I'll come now to Councillor Brown.
Yes, I'm appalled at John Ross's comments, to be quite frank on that one. You'd think he'd never heard of the Verity House Agreement. You'd think he'd never heard of the fact that the First Minister announced a council tax freeze without any consultation with local government, but even without any consultation with his coalition partners or with his cabinet, or it would appear with his civil servants either. We're dealing with a First Minister who on this matter has really driven a coach and horses through understanding and trust on the local government family's front. And I think that's the background we've got to be in mind here. The other point I'd make, if I may, just on a more positive point in a sort of way, is that the council tax point is actually quite important, because there does appear to be, and I think we echo this from the conversation we have with constituents as well, a general level of support for a reasonable council tax increase that bears some relation to the rate of inflation. And I think it's worth commenting that if the Scottish Government had, and it remains to be seen if they do have or not, 200, 300, 400 million pounds across Scotland to support the council tax freeze, what a difference that would have made had they actually put that into supporting council services and avoiding us having this sort of problem in the first place, with all the worries that go for staff levels, for services, for people that are served by these things across South Lanarkshire. And I do think we've actually got to keep that as the context of the thing, rather than the somewhat defensive comments that were made by the leader of the SNP group.
Okay, thank you. Could I come now to Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Chair. I think this morning has been a very bleak morning. Every report, or the last 2 or 3 reports, it's more bad news and more bad news. And I'm with you. Under no circumstances this year am I allowing the Scottish Government to get away with doing what they've done to us. And the MSPs, in my view, for me, will be held accountable when people start rattling their doors about cuts to services and various different things. And no more will I accept, and I can go back to the Lark Hall tea room where we had a MSP standing out there with blowing a whistle with people when it was actually going to get rescinded anyway, but they then join groups and they then come to tell us how bad we are when they've caused the problem in the first place. And I wasn't going to mention COSLA or the Verity House Agreement, but how can Mr Ross actually say what he just said when a man actually said to me, it was like years ago they used to call it fag packet decisions. It was like a light bulb going on. I think I'll just say that, and that's what I'm going to say. When he didn't tell COSLA that Mr Ross is telling us that we should be going to COSLA because they're here to help us and do our bidding, he didn't tell COSLA, he didn't tell his own people, he didn't tell his the people who he is in coalition with, that'll be the Green Party. He didn't tell anybody, he just did it. He just actually stood up there and he must have just decided, I think I better just say this, and he did it. And like everybody else, we're entitled to be very wary of where the money is going to come from and what's going to happen to us, because if somebody can just stand up and tell nobody that, well, what else are they going to do? So I'm 100% with you. Under no circumstances this year am I allowing opposition councillors to tell me that I'm a bad person, or anybody else that's having to make decisions on cuts. I am not going to allow MSPs to write letters to us complaining, or to stand out and say, look at me, I'm good because I'm going to defend the indefensible. So I think there'll be battles in the road ahead, but I don't understand the comments about COSLA, because they were the last people that ever get told in the first place. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Can I come to Councillor McLaughlin?
Thank you, Chair. Much of what I was going to say has already been said. Robert just pipped me to the post there. But I want to come back to the survey. Just over 2,000 people is quite a healthy number, I think. And if you think of any opinion polls that ever takes place, I've never been asked my opinion, and I've been kicking around for quite a while. So it gives you an idea of the small sample of people who are used when you're collating information from surveys. And it would be interesting, as Alec Allison suggested, to find out, or maybe was it Robert that suggested, that it'd be good to hear, if we can get that information, what the sort of broad feeling is, if similar local authorities have been, doing the same similar thing. But the council tax freeze, you know, it's not a new thing coming up with a council tax freeze. I remember many administrations ago when we had a council tax freeze. And to me, it seems like a bit of a vanity project. It's like let's give people something, and it makes it look like we're being the good guys here. But you can only give what you've got. And if there's money available for the government to fund a council tax freeze, why on earth have they been starving of cash for such a long period of time? Now, the results of the survey, and the people who suggested, the majority of the people who suggested they're happy to pay between 5 and 10%, I just wonder if the First Minister had thought about doing that prior to making his announcement and even discussing with his colleagues. And that point's already been made, Chair, but I just wanted to reiterate that. And going back to the point when I spoke earlier about the council tax freezes, some people in the room may recall that we had an option to increase our council tax, even though the government was funding a council tax freeze, but they were funding it at a very low level. And it made it really difficult for the council to introduce an increase in council tax, because you would need to have an inordinately higher amount of an increase than you would normally get, because you would lose any funding that you would get from the government. Paul will remember this. But when you speak to people, and I've yet to speak to a single person, and I suppose it goes along the lines of what's been suggested in the survey, I've yet to speak to a single person with any common sense whatsoever who knows the difficulties that local government are facing. The suggestion of a council tax freeze just does not make sense. No one that I've spoke to would agree that that's the right thing to do, given the austerity that we're suffering, the difficulty that we're suffering as a local authority. So just to back up what Robert and Eileen said, I'm actually really quite surprised that John Ross trying to defend the indefensible. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I just want to bring some of this to a head before we conclude. Can I maybe come back to the report and just make the point that when we get to this stage in the budget process every year, we go out to consult with the public before we've set council tax. That's the big variable that this year we don't appear to have any control over. And before we know the grant settlement from the government. And so although we are consulting on £18 million of a package of savings, it remains to be seen now, and it's almost entirely within the gift of the government, the extent to which we will have a £20 million budget gap to bridge or not. And it's a very sensitive time, because there is always concern and anxiety about the nature, and sometimes misinformation and misunderstandings, but about the nature of the savings that we propose at this point. But we've got to take the issue head on. We've got to level with people about the position the council has been faced in. Almost 80% of our funding comes from the Scottish Government, and that remaining 20% of our revenue budget that we control, we now see that a big chunk of that has been taken effectively out with our control, depending on how this freeze works. The significance of the 5 to 10% figure is that I think if the First Minister were to fund a council tax freeze at a rate that is any lower than that, then the First Minister would be doing the people of South Lanarkshire an enormous disservice. I think any fully funded council tax freeze has to be at the very least 5%, but you know what, it also has to be accompanied with a proper increase in that core funding, because if we had proper increases in core funding, then I think the point that Robert Brown has made is a lot of these really horrible cuts that have been tabled and are in front of us for consideration over the coming weeks, we would not have to consider, and a great deal of concern that is out there in the community would still be concern in the community about savings and the position the council's in. But a lot of the concerns about particular projects and particular savings would be alleviated. And really what I want to do is just to reinforce the point that we don't consult on savings that make up our, the projected gap that we face earlier in the year. A lot of work has gone in to getting that gap down to the figure of 20 million that's in the paper today. And if you turn to page 146 of your papers, you can see how what we were facing just a few weeks ago, because of some of the measures that Paul and his team has taken, because of the benefit of changes at Strathclyde Pension Fund, we're able to reprofile the budget gaps that we face over coming years. We were looking at a figure of 70 million over 2 financial years, now a figure in the region of 42 million. Still over the piece, having to take a substantial amount of money, the best part of £100 million, over the next sort of 4 financial years from people services, from council budgets. But the point I'm making is that decisions that we've taken up until now and recommendations that have been made by our officials up until now have ensured that what we go out to consult on in terms of savings is far reduced from the gap that we were facing just a couple of weeks ago. I think the final point to make is we absolutely have to discuss these issues, because we have to be totally robust about the need for the fair funding settlement that local government has been denied for many years to come to councils now, because the funding situation has never been so grave. The kind of savings we're having to consider have never been, to my mind, so awful and affect so much of the programme that we want to deliver. That, by the way, it has an enormous amount of overlap with the programme the government say they want to deliver. A lot of these cuts are self-defeating, but we have a legal duty to balance the diminished budget that we have. And so we can't get around the fact that those difficult decisions have to be taken. We've got to confront the issue head on. That means being honest with the public, and it means being robust with politicians at a national level. And if past behaviour is an indicator of future behaviour, then I think any hope we might have had that the Humza Yousaf era marked a departure from the Nicola Sturgeon era of real terms cuts to our core funding of something in the region of 10%, worse than any other part of the Scottish budget, then actually a lot of those hopes have been dashed by the chaotic approach to policy making we've seen over recent weeks. I see Margaret Cooper has raised her hand, so before I conclude, could I just come to Margaret Cooper? Oh, Margaret Cooper has disappeared. So I think maybe that was an accident, raising her hand. So if she's not coming back in, I'll come back to the recommendations, which is to approve the paper with that one alteration that primary school is excluded from the consultation on school transport. Can we agree the recommendations? We are agreed. Thank you very much. I will now come to item 11, which is an item for noting on the programme for government for 2023. And could I ask Cleland Snedden to speak to this report? Cleland.
Thank you, Chair. And just mindful of time, I'll be reasonably brief with what is quite an extensive report. As our normal practice, we bring a report in relation to the published programme for government for 2023 this year. This is a principal policy statement by the Scottish Government. It's published annually, and we present a summary to Executive Committee for members' information, along with an appendix that outlines the potential implications for South Lanarkshire Council. The programme for government for 2023 is slightly different to what we've seen in the last couple of years. It largely comprises a restatement of some key policy priorities, so there's less new items within this year's programme. Section 4 of the covering report details some of the key areas that feature within the programme for government. Of the 230 commitments within the programme, around about 99 are considered to have implications for Scottish local government. So the report itself excuse me, has a summary of also the proposed legislative programme. You'll see that tucked in at section 4.3 of the covering report, and that gives an indication of the piece of legislation we anticipate Parliament working its way through this year. A couple of items I would just pick out as particularly key pieces of legislation. So the first is in relation to education reform and the Education Reform Bill, the first iterations of which are currently going through a consultative programme, but there is some very significant change that we anticipate being contained within that bill. As we heard and discussed earlier, there is proposals for a new housing bill, and given the current context that Sharon and Stephen outlined for us, that will be significant. And the third area I want to just flag up is the human rights bill, probably the least defined at the moment, but potentially the one that's got the greatest cross-cutting implications. Two other areas I want to just pick out that's not in this covering report, but recent correspondence between the Scottish Government and COSLA has led to a written commitment from Government to the acceleration of the legislation to re-present the European Charter for Local Self-Government. That is anticipated to be early 2024. Probably of all the pieces of work in terms of local government, that's probably the most important and most significant piece of legislation within the programme. And finally, one other existing bill that's going through its scrutiny process is in relation to the National Care Service, and there is a deadline for Parliament to complete the Stage 1 review of the National Care Service Bill by the end of January 2024, and also to represent a financial memorandum to the relevant committee by the 11th of December, I think, both of which are quite challenging and are also subject to some correspondence between COSLA and the Scottish Government in relation to the council tax freeze and what we would anticipate some measures that would show good faith in relation to the Verity House agreement. So, Chair, the detail of implications for South Lanarkshire Council are tucked into the appendix. As these items come forward, they would be presented to the relevant council committees. So the recommendation is simply to note the content of the report, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. If anyone wishes to ask any questions, could you indicate now, and could I come to Councillor Hamilton?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think it's very fitting that this has came forward after what we've discussed today, considering the amount of cuts and ultimately coming from the Scottish Government that we are facing. Going through this paper, it is very useful that it's set out the way it is, because going through, there's holes upon holes that you can see. The Verity House agreement has been well documented in today's committee, that it's not worth the paper it's written on, it's already broken. Best Start, Bright Future, the Scottish Government are proposing to downgrade Wish and Neonatal, which will affect our most vulnerable children in South Lanarkshire. Investing in our schools, South Lanarkshire have not receiving any funding for through LEAP, despite having very robust and good proposals, including Keir Campus, which is very disappointing. Supporting children and young people, but ultimately they're not funding local government properly, which means that we're having to consider cuts in youth services, cuts in librarians and schools, core services to education, and the cuts behind it are much worse and much less palatable if we don't make decisions on this. Quite frankly, I've no words, but I could go on and on and on about it. But going by Councillor Ross's comments, despite what the billboards say, we certainly have a group of SNP yes men and no independent thinking in the slightest. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton, are there any other contributions on this paper? I'm not seeing any. Can we agree to note the paper? agreed. So can I come now to the item for urgent business? Hang on, I've got a hand, Councillor Loudon.
Hi, Chair. Just a quick point of order. I know this is happening to another few people who've been on hybrid. I was thrown out during that last item again. That's about the third time it's happened today. I think there's something going on with Confero. So I didn't hear much of the contribution of that last one or the previous one. Just to note for the clerk, this could be looked into because I know it's affected quite a few of us on the call this morning.
Right, and that might explain why some people have appeared and disappeared in my screen, but we'll note that. Okay, thank you. Can I come now to item 12, which is urgent business? We have the urgent motion that was circulated earlier. Because of Confero issues, and if the relevant, those who have declared their interest may wish to leave at this point. So if those of you who have declared their interest could leave the meeting at this point. The item for urgent business, because of those issues with people joining online and also the interest that Councillor Cooper set out she was going to declare earlier, I'm just going to present this. So the paper that is in front of you, and Councillor Walker had agreed during the recess earlier to second the item. However, I have to be honest, I don't think we need to take a decision and formally move or second anything today, because if you look at the proposal that is in front of you, the proposal is actually to refer this to the full council meeting. Really, the purpose in bringing this forward as an urgent item is to highlight the concerns that have been expressed about Kilbride Hospice, which is the hospice this council has a very special and particular relationship with. I won't elaborate in great detail, other than to just draw attention to the indications that have been made by NHS Lanarkshire around a reduction in beds relating to some of their staffing issues, and to highlight the issue that is set out in the text before you. The motion itself would ask that representations are made on the issue of hospice care. However, those issues, under the terms of what has been put forward, would be referred to the council. And I think if I were to reflect a discussion that was had at the leaders' meeting earlier this week, I think that was certainly going to afford the political groups the time to investigate this issue ourselves and bring an informed position to the full council. But nonetheless, given the gravity of the issue, the council wished to, we're asking the council to consider the item today. I'm just keeping an eye on those who have indicated they wish to speak. Could I come to Councillor MacDonald?
Thanks, Chair. Can I just put in record my admiration for hospice staff who do a fabulous job of supporting individuals and families at their greatest time of need. And with regard to the urgent business before us today, what I would say is that while the aims of the urgent business are laudable, and I think everybody would agree about that, I have some questions about the timing involved here. The next full council is not until the 31st of January next year, which means that the earliest we could act on this would be the beginning of February. This is after the Scottish Government budget, and by this time the proposed reduction would have been in place for 3 of the 4 months. Yet the motion calls for reassurance from the Health Board that they'll reinstate services at the earliest opportunity, and also calls for fair funding. So if this motion reflects the will of this committee, and I believe it does, it makes no logical sense to wait until January to pass this motion. It will be near redundant by then. So can I ask the movers of this urgent item why they aren't proposing to move this motion today? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I will make the point that I've stepped in to move the motion at the last minute, Councillor MacDonald. However, I understand that the movers of the motion took some advice on what the appropriate way would be to bring the issue forward. So I'm just going to defer now to Cleland to update on that. Cleland.
Thanks, Chair. And just to be clear, This was taken as an urgent item. There is no provision for tabling a motion to the Executive Committee. That belongs in full council. So therefore the urgent item is looking to highlight the issue, and it's looking to refer the draft motion on to the next full council. That's the advice. It is, however, up to this committee, if the committee wishes, as part of this urgent item, to ask myself as Chief Executive to write in the terms of that draft. But can I maybe just be absolutely clear so that Geraldine, as monitoring officer, gives the definitive view around that? Thanks.
The Chief Executive is correct. Standing orders don't allow motions to be brought to this committee. So that's why the advice was the motion would have to go to the council, because it was presented as a motion.
Right, thank you. Could I come to, unless Councillor MacDonald wants to come back, can I come to Councillor, no, hang on. Councillor MacDonald does want to come back. I'll come back to Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask then that we do follow up with a letter given the urgency that's required in this matter, and given that if we wait until, you know, the beginning of February to act on this, we'll be 3/4 of the way through the proposal. So it makes sense to actually act on this as early as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Councillor Cooper next. He appears to be on the meeting. Hang on a second.
Okay, thank you for allowing me in. Geraldine did say it was competent for me to be able to speak at this. I suppose I agree with Councillor MacDonald. Waiting to the end of January is a pretty defunct way of doing things. This is an urgent situation, and although it's going to be part of the way through the proposal, there is a suspicion that this is going to be much longer term than the 4 months that have been suggested by the NHS board, and that this is just kicking it off. I would like to propose as well to the Chair or to the Chief Executive that we have a briefing session for councillors before the full council meeting in December, if possible, where the Chief Executive of Kilbride Hospice, along with the relevant person from the NHS board, come along and present the information to councillors and take questions, because they're the ones that are most involved in this, and they're the ones that are most competent to be able to answer difficult questions that I don't think anyone in the room is able to answer. So I would add to what the councillor said, that we write straight away, and that we also organise a briefing session between now and the end of a session in December for all councillors, so that they've got a clear understanding of what's happening. And the reason I wanted this to come as quickly as possible to councillors is because this affects the whole of South Lanarkshire. In actual fact, some of it affects North Lanarkshire as well, and I don't know whether they're taking anything to their executive or full council, but it affects the whole of South Lanarkshire, and it's not going to be terribly long before your constituents are going to be asking you why they can't get use of Kilbride Hospice and its services. There's a huge waiting list, and unfortunately that's created because people have to pass away before other people can get in. But there's new information regarding the consultants and how they're dealing with this matter, which I really do feel councillors should know about. Thank you for listening.
Right. Thank you. Can I come to Councillor Nelson, and then I'll maybe try to suggest the way forward. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it is vital that we raise these concerns urgently so that patients can receive the necessary support and compassionate care for what is a difficult time for families and very challenging times as well. I think also there is another option that we can have a special council meeting. I think that's also another opportunity for this motion to come out there, but I'm happy to support that a letter be written vitally as urgent as possible given the circumstances. But again, I go back to that original point. There is a chance that we could have a special council meeting to debate and bring that motion forward there.
Can I suggest, so I think Councillor McDonald's making a fair point, which is that by the time we get round to the next meeting, the way in which the motion that has been suggested is drafted would be dated. Can I suggest that what we do is we table this issue nonetheless for the next council meeting, but in the meantime, there have been a number of suggestions to say that if the committee is suitably concerned, and there's certainly a concern coming from members of the committee, that the Chief Executive kind of suggest that he can write to express those views to the government now. And I think that would maybe accommodate the motion itself, but also some of the feedback from members. So there was another suggestion in there about a briefing session. I'm going to bring in Cleland. I've got two more contributions, but I'll just bring in Cleland just now.
Thank you, Chair. And just to be clear, so if the Exec Committee agrees, I will write one to Ms Minto at the Scottish Government in the terms of the motion. I'll also write to the Chair and Chief Executive of NHS Lanarkshire, again making them aware of the terms of the urgent item and the proposed motion. In relation to asking our NHS colleagues to arrange a briefing session for all members, I'll make that request. It's just to say this is the core business of another organisation. We don't have a right to demand that. That's not in our gift, but I will make that request. And if they are able to accommodate that request, we can do as Councillor Cooper indicated and reach out to the Chief Executive of Kilbride Hospice to participate as well. Thank you.
Right, okay. I think aside from the mechanics, I think it's quite clear what the sentiment is. So I'll maybe just try to dispose of the rest of this as quickly as I can. So can I come to Councillor Loudon?
Thanks, Chair. It was actually a question on the mechanics, although I think Cleland has cleared it up a bit. In your summary, Chair, you'd missed out the first part of it was really 2 points that Councillor MacDonald was making. One of them was around the timing of making sure that a letter was out before the Scottish Government budget, but the other one was about the part of the motion which is asking to seek reassurance from NHS Lanarkshire officials about reinstatement at the earliest opportunity. So I'm glad that Cleland has picked up back up on that, because I think that was a really important point that Councillor MacDonald was waiting. So if this was waiting until the January meeting, then it would be a couple of months into that by the time it was raised. Just to double check something, because I'm not clear from the way forward that you'd suggested, Chair, you were talking about still having this tabled at the next full council meeting. But if the motion was tabled as it is at the next full council meeting, then both of those points will be already covered.
Yeah. So first of all, the Chief Executive has just mischievously suggested that it will have to be done before next Thursday that he writes his letter. And secondly, I suppose I'm proposing to refer the item, as it were, to the next council meeting. I don't think actually the wording, events will, we would hope, have moved on by then, and the wording wouldn't be current by that point. So it's the item rather than the specific text of the meeting. So my suggestion is you can write in the terms that have just been described, the terms that Councillor MacDonald has suggested, and that we table the issue, as it were, to come to the next council meeting. And I think that seems like a way of navigating this just now, hopefully to everyone's satisfaction. Okay, Councillor Cooper.
The meeting's recorded, and obviously the public view the meeting, and I wondered what opportunity the public have to view this paper. Was it included with the executive papers that the public can access online? Because the content of the paper hasn't been read out, and we've had a discussion about this. And were I just to be a member of the public looking in on this, I would be wondering what on earth you're actually talking about. So that was the first point. The second point is that I'm really keen and pushing for a briefing session for colleagues, and whether the Chief Executive of the NHS Board agrees to attend or not, I do think that councillor colleagues should hear from the Chief Executive of Kilbride Hospice about the dire straits that they are in because of all of this. They have tried to engage with consultants from other health boards over the last few days, and the South Lanarkshire consultants have refused to allow their colleagues cross-border to work with Kilbride, and that was to try to offset the problem of reducing the number of beds. So I really do feel that, and it is a charitable organisation. It's not funded by the Scottish Government. It's funded through charity that takes place in South Lanarkshire. And I really do think that we've got a group of consultants in South Lanarkshire that are ruling the roost, and they're not allowing Kilbride Hospice to function, even if they go to extreme lengths of contacting oncologists across into other areas that are willing to do the work. They're not going to allow them to cross-border to do that. So I really do feel there is a need for a briefing for councillors, and there's a need for accountability from the Chief Executive of the Health Board, whether she comes or not. But I do still feel that an urgent briefing is required from Kilbride to really explain to colleagues what's going on here. Otherwise, there's a chance that we'll end up with no hospice in South Lanarkshire. They're talking about transferring critical care patients to St Andrews, and personally I would prefer to be in my own local hospice, as would relatives, than to be transported up to Airdrie when we've got a perfectly excellent brand new facility on our doorstep. Thank you.
Thank you, and just to confirm, we will make the request for a briefing session for members, and the paper, the urgent item as it has been tabled, will, I believe, appear in the notes of this meeting. Can I come to Geraldine McCann?
Just to reiterate that, Chair, that the actual text will be reflected in the minutes. So although it's not been published at the moment, the text of it will be in the minutes when they are published.
Okay. Right. Well, I see no other hands or indications that anyone else wishes to speak. So I've outlined an approach that seems to meet with the committee's agreement. Can we agree that the approach I've just outlined is the one that we will indeed take? Are we agreed? With that, then, can I bring the meeting to a close and thank everyone for your attendance today? Thank you. Actually, before I do, stop the meeting. Before I do, this will now be the last meeting that both Cleland and Geraldine will have attended of this committee, and I know we did all pass glowing tributes to them at the full council. I'm not proposing to repeat any of that. You'll be delighted to know, but it is 12:30. But I think it's only fair